see you guys in the dark.
6 years ago, my sister and I were living with our grandparents. I had just started seeing my now wife, and she spent a lot of time at the house with me. So we were three young, attractive women, all congregating in one place on a regular basis. We did attract some attention. My grandparents' house is in a small Midwestern town. It's located in a quiet neighborhood, just a block off from a country highway. It was a long driveway, a big open lot on one side, and had a tree line on the other side. It also has a really big backyard that connects with several other backyards in the neighborhood. The first time that I saw the man, my wife and I had been out on gravel traveling and talking about everything under the sun. She was planning to go home that night, so we parked on the cross street from the grandparents' house so that we could finish our conversation before she dropped me off. I suddenly felt this feeling like I was being watched. I thought I was just being paranoid because she had been talking about creepy things. I just tried to shrug it off. Right before I got out of the car, I noticed the silhouette of a man standing in a tree line on the side of my grandparents' house. It was right around dusk, so I couldn't see him well enough to get a description of him, but I could tell that he was there. I told my now wife, and she told me not to get out. We sat there for a little while, watching him, but the man didn't move one bit. After what felt like a long time, I told her that I was going to make a run for it. I could see my grandfather sitting at his chair by the kitchen window, so I was sure that I would be fine. I jumped out of the car and sprinted. I turned and locked the door as soon as I stopped in front of the door, and Grandpa could tell that I was spooked. I told him what I had seen, and that I thought we should call the cops. He told me that my friend Kenny had been over a little while I was out. He was drunk, and he was probably taking a leak in the trees before he walked through the backyard home. I still was shaken, but that reassured me just a little bit. It was about 3 days. My sister was at her boyfriend's. My love was at her place, and it's about 1 in the morning. My grandparents were asleep. I was up reading articles on my laptop and decided it was time to go to bed. There's a big, beautiful picture window in the living room that looks over the driveway. It only has small lace curtains that are probably sheer. I stood up to cross the living room and saw something. I jumped back, peered through the window frame for a closer look. There was a silhouette of a man standing at the end of my driveway. He was tall, well-built, was wearing a baseball cap, and seemed like he was looking right into my big window. I started to panic. My chair was visible from the window. How long had he been watching me? I ran to check that the garage door and front door were locked. Ran down the hallway to knock on my grandparents' door. I heard my grandma say, "Come on in." I told her what I saw. She woke up my grandfather. He walked out to the living room with me, but no one was there. My grandparents were popular in the community because they were landlords, and they helped people that were down on their luck. He told me that it might have been Judd, one of their renters who borrowed a truck from them a couple months back. He said that I should go to bed, not worry about it at all. I went to bed feeling uneasy, but trying hard to convince myself that my grandfather was right. I mean, the silhouette I saw was kind of fit, and could possibly be Judd. The next time I saw it was the very next night. My love was still at her place. My sister and grandparents were in bed, and I was sitting in my chair, reading creepy stories. All of a sudden, I heard movement in the garage. The garage is connected to the house and shares a wall with the living room. I tried to convince myself that I was hearing things. I was paranoid, or maybe it was just an animal. Then I heard movement again, and a cough. I bolted up from the chair, checked the garage door lock, ran screaming for my grandfather. He jumped up from bed, grabbed his gun, and went to go check it out. There was no one. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed. My grandfather sternly told me that I needed to start going to bed at night instead of staying up and reading scary stories. He did lock the doors from the garage to the outside, though. I went to bed, firmly convinced that there had been someone in that garage. The next morning, I went to the basement to get my sister up. I asked her if she had noticed anything weird at the house the last few days. She told me that she thought she heard some weird noises outside her window a couple of nights before, and that her dog had growled. Her dog never did that. that she was scared. But we lived in such a small, sleepy Midwestern town, bad things don't happen. So she tried to convince herself that her dog was just overreacting to something, probably like a squirrel. I told her about the last 4 days, and that she was shocked. We told Grandma and Grandpa, but they were convinced that it was just a coincidence. Grandpa had checked himself twice, after all. My sister and I agreed that we would keep watch for any weird things happening. 3 more nights later, my wife came to stay the night with me. I had told her about the incidents that were happening with me and my sister, but she, like our grandparents, thought that there was a coincidence. She even told me that we were being dramatic. I laughed, and we continued with our plans for the night: dinner, gravel traveling, and reading in bed before we fell asleep. My wife liked to sleep on the side of the bed next to the window in my room. We would always crack the windows just a little bit so that she could feel the breeze come in from the backyard. It had rained earlier in the day, and we had some really great breeze rolling through the night. Before bed, we walked to the window to crack it, and I begged her not to. She and I went back and forth about it for a little while, and she eventually relented and agreed to turn the fan on instead. We settled into bed so that I could read her some articles, and I fell asleep shortly thereafter. The next thing I remember is hearing my wife yell at me to wake up. After I fell asleep, my wife took the opportunity to crack the window. Once she fell asleep, she found herself waking up for no reason whatsoever. She decided that she must have to use the bathroom and walked down the hallway. Once returning to the bedroom, she saw a shadow move outside the bedroom window, through the curtains. She stood stock still for a moment, paralyzed, and it didn't move. So she crawled back into bed. She leaned in and kissed my cheek before turning to face the window, where she saw a man staring directly at her through the open part of the window. He was tall, well-built, and wearing a ball cap. She jumped up immediately to slam the window shut and started yelling at me to get up. Suddenly, my sister burst into the bedroom. Diesel was growling at the window yet again. I heard footsteps. What did you see? We sat up together for a little while, making our plans to tell Grandma and Grandpa in the morning, before we went back to bed in the early hours of the morning. When we woke up, we told Grandpa what had happened. When he looked around the house, he found footsteps leading to both our windows in the backyard. He freaked out and told my grandma, and said he was calling the police. My grandmother told him not to bother because none of us had a detailed description, so the police wouldn't be able to do anything about it. He was probably just a peeping Tom anyways, which was harmless. She had a peeping Tom as a little girl. We should just make sure that we're not naked or otherwise indecent in front of any windows with open curtains. They argued for a little bit, and Grandpa finally agreed with her. He told the 3 of us girls, though, that we were not to leave the house alone for any reason after dark. He'd wait up until each one of us got there if we were working late. Our life went on. There wasn't any more activity, and we figured that whoever had been watching us had moved on. We were still following Grandfather's instructions, but as young 20-something-year-olds, it started to feel less urgent as the days went on without any happenings. We were feeling secure and safe, but we weren't. 10 days after my wife saw the man peeking in through the window, my sister and I were up late doing college homework together. We each had assignments due online at midnight, and were scrambling to finish them. I submitted mine at around 11:50. My sister had hers done a few minutes later, and we decided that we were hungry. We didn't have any junk food in the house, so we decided to go to McDonald's. We got the dog, got in the car, blared our music, and then left. We were having a good time driving through town, listening to our pumped-up music and stuffing our faces. But we knew that we needed to get home for class in the morning. So instead of driving around to finish our music, we decided to go directly home and pull into the driveway while our song was finishing up. We were gone for a total of 30 minutes, and we sat in the driveway for about 3 more. We got out of the car to come up to the long driveway, no care in the world besides getting into bed, and started walking leisurely up to the driveway, joking and singing. Suddenly I heard a crunching noise, like someone stepping on a leaf. Diesel suddenly jumped behind us and started snarling. I remember hearing my sister say, "Run," as we started sprinting up the driveway. We could hear the footsteps of someone running right behind us, and I just knew that it was the dude that had been watching us. I knew that he was going to catch up to us and probably hurt us, and all because we had been careless to leave the house so late at night for a burger. We got almost to the landing of the stairs, and my sister shouted the dog's name. He came running up and ran into the house right behind us, where we locked the door. We never looked back to see who was chasing us, but we both agreed that it must be the man who had been watching us this whole time. We started trying to catch our breath. Diesel was not trying to catch his, though. He kept running to the living room window, watching and growling. Then he'd run to us and just look, for just a second, like he was making sure that we were okay. Then he'd run back to the living room window and growl yet again. As soon as she caught her breath, my sister went to wake up my grandfather. The dog stopped growling. We called the police and told them what had happened, and they agreed to patrol the area. They never did find the man, but we never saw or heard from him again. It still makes my skin crawl to think of what could have happened to my sister and I if my dog hadn't rushed to our protection, or what could have happened to my wife and I if she hadn't noticed him peeking under the window. I'm just happy that we are not hurt. I used to have a weekly overnight babysitting job for a couple who frequently spent nights in another nearby city, caring for one of their ailing parents. It was an easy gig because they only had one kid who was 8 years old, and pretty independent. I just played with him for a few hours, got him ready for bed, and then got paid for another 14 hours while I watched TV, raided their fridge, and slept. The one thing that I hated about the job, however, was the house. It was somewhat modern house in the country, and they had big open windows, and the style was such that there weren't any curtains. I just had to watch TV and live with the anxiety of knowing someone outside could be watching me, and I'd have no idea about it. One night I was sitting down in the living room, and I thought that I heard a noise, so I turned the volume on the TV down. Sure enough, what I heard was a slight tap, tap, tap. Looked around and didn't see anything out of ordinary, so I just assumed that it was a noise from a tree or something outside. But every time that I turned the volume back up, I heard the same tapping. Finally, I turned the TV off and started walking around the house. As my eyes adjusted to the darker room, I saw a man outside the window, fingernails pressed up against the glass, making that tapping noise and smiling directly at me. I freaked out and sprinted upstairs to check on the kid. But the worst part was that there wasn't a phone upstairs, so I eventually had to creep back downstairs to grab a phone and call the police. I tried to avoid looking at the window, but I snuck a glance, and he was still there, just watching me calmly. I locked myself and the kid into the bedroom and waited for the police. They never found any trace of someone around the house, and I suspect that they thought that I was some kid playing a prank, but I know the person I saw was a full-grown man, and that he just stood there enjoying the fear that he caused me to feel. In high school, I was obsessed with movies and wanted to be a director when I grew up. My parents saved and bought me a camcorder. I spent money from my after-school job at a restaurant buying tapes and editing equipment to play around with. A few months after my next-door neighbor died, his wife had a huge garage sale. And though my neighbor had never told me, he shared my interest in making home movies. I found a bunch of blank camcorder tapes on sale, and his wife ended up giving them to me for free. I went home and put the tape in, watched in horror as I realized how upsetting the contents were. Tape after tape, I found footage of my home and the area around my home taken from outside my windows as my family and I remained oblivious. My bedroom seemed to be his favorite to lurk outside, and he would often see the inside clearly if I left the blinds open. He would just stand there and breathe and record whatever was happening inside. It was chilling enough until I saw footage of a cabin about an hour and a half from my home, where I had gone with some friends the previous summer. He had been outside the cabin filming, and had even gone inside to film our beds and go through our stuff while we had gone into town for groceries. It seemed strange that his wife wouldn't have checked the tapes to see what was on them, given that her husband had just passed away, and she could have gotten rid of some irreplaceable family memories. But then again, maybe she had an intuition about what she would find, and the kind of person that her late husband really was. I always check the blinds before I go outside. For years, people have made fun of me when they witnessed this, and my husband thinks that I'm crazy. We live out in the country, and we've never had an issue with someone trespassing, but I still lean over every time I'm going out the front door and make sure that no one's out there first. One night I was about to go to bed when I realized that I left my phone charger in my car. I had put it in my purse that morning because the one I had at work broke, and only just remembered it as I left, placing it on my passenger seat. I needed to charge my phone, and I didn't have a reason to be afraid of the 10 yards from my front door to my car parked in the driveway, but I peeked out the window anyways. I was running on such instinct that my hand was already on the lock and about to flip it and open the door when my brain registered that what I had seen wasn't normal. I shifted my weight and looked again, squinted to see in the dim light by the garage we leave on all the time. I saw a man crouched by the front door holding a hammer. He couldn't be visible from the window on the front door. You wouldn't even see him until he was right next to you. I screamed for my husband and watched him book it down the drive. I didn't see him get into a car, but he must have gone somewhere. We called the cops, and they couldn't find any sign of him. We ended up investing some money in floodlights the very next day, and no one made fun of my habit ever again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.